Thanks very much for the introduction. All right. Today it's an interesting talk. Coming from the Midwest, we don't have nearly the same age of golf courses. So when I moved out here, I was sort of blown away to see just the difference in 50 years of a golf course and its maturity. And one of the biggest differences that I noticed initially was just the volume and the size of the trees that we have in the Northeast. We really have some professional trees out here, and that was some of the first things that my boss, Dave Otis, had sort of told me about and learned through the years. And his area of emphasis has always been focused on trees, and it's sort of moved on to me. So that's really what we're going to talk on today. Before we really get started, I think it's important for everyone to really think about trees and take out the emotional aspect of what your thoughts are about trees in general, and just think a tree is a tree, and there's no meaning behind it. There's nothing to do with who planted it, when it was planted, a shot that you maybe hit over it 30 years ago, something like that. Just think about trees as very basic structures on a golf course, and we'll go from there. So a little bit of history. Again, coming from the Midwest, this is very obvious. Most golf courses were built on farms. The same is true for golf courses around here, although a lot of them were chosen for their topography. It really hasn't been since the last 40, 50 years or so that we really started carving out forests to develop golf courses. In most cases, older golf courses, we had these areas and we just sort of worked with the topography. Trees were oftentimes added to golf courses later on for a few different reasons. Some, really that made sense for strategy, sometimes for definition to, know where playing corridors are supposed to be on a particular hole, perhaps create some separation with adjacent properties or adjacent parts of your golf course, teeing grounds adjacent to putting greens, things like that. And in some instances, like Dave pointed out, trying to block unsightly views of, porta-johns or you name it. So these are, sort of the basic reasons for trees. And, simply, again, we like trees as just a society. I think this is one of the most common things that people like to do is to, you buy a house, the American dream, let's plant a nice oak tree right out in front or something, and we'll grow and mature with it. And that's what a lot of people like to do in their golf courses as well. Unfortunately, what we know, and we've known this for many, many years, is that although trees can add value and add aesthetics to a golf course, to our properties, they also bring out an awful lot of problems. And that's challenging because once a tree is on your golf course, it's really hard to take it out, despite all the factors that contribute to agronomic challenges, whether it's shade, limited air movement. Trees also create playability issues, whether it's one-dimensional playability options, bad strategy, overly penal in a lot of cases, maybe not necessarily for the better players, but for the high handicap players. A lot of times I see trees that are just in excess and completely over-penalize the high handicap players. You lose some views in your golf courses. That's something that oftentimes you realize after trees are taken out, but it's hard to convince membership as to we need to take a tree down because we want to expose a great view of a great part of the golf course, some features that maybe are hidden. There's some safety issues with trees, and that's sort of all I'll say. Jay's going to mention a little bit more of that later on after I finish up. And then there's also some increased maintenance costs of it. Planting a tree is, as Dave put it in an article, it's the initial investment. There's the down payment, I should say. There's a long-term investment to maintenance of that tree and maintenance around that tree. And again, the challenge is once a tree is on your golf course property, or even in your home lawn, many people don't want to remove them for a variety of reasons. So I don't want to really touch too much on the agronomic challenges of trees. We've kind of covered that ad nauseum in past presentations. Feel free to contact myself or Dave if you want any specific information about the agronomics. We've got a lot of resources for you there, but simply put, trees cause shade issues, they restrict air movement, they lead to tree root competition, all of which weakens your golf course turf performance. Maybe the turf holds on, but it's definitely weaker, and you probably have a more challenging job to meet membership expectations when you've got some of these issues. And then again, as Dave just touched on, we see more winter injury, which I think is going to be a common theme this spring, where we've got shade issues. And then sort of moving into the playability aspect of it, this is something that we see, and a good lesson that I learned from Dave actually that it's interesting, it was brought up today about the rock image. Most of my pictures are from golf courses actually outside of this region today. So this is a good friend's golf course in North Carolina. It's about a 25-year-old golf course. And what you see, right in the image there, 200-yard marker. I hit a great drive. It was rare to hit a good drive from this golf course actually, but dead center in the fairway, 200 yards out, short par 5. Anyone have any clue where I'm supposed to hit the ball? There's the green. You know what you don't see? The pond. It's a 200-yard risk-reward, second shot into this green to get there in 2. This is the classic risk-reward par 5. I mean, I'm not a golf course architect, but it seems pretty obvious that they want me to be able to hit a good drive and maybe go for it. Could I hit the 200-yard shot all carry over the water? Maybe. Can I hit the 200-yard shot over 75 feet tall trees over water? Probably not. So this is an example of where sort of golfers start to dictate where trees are versus the original intent of the golf course, developed by the golf course architect. So these types of things happen all over on your golf courses. Maybe not quite this extreme, but nonetheless, that's a definite example. Here's another one. I don't want to be the guy that comes up here and tells you that trees grow on golf courses, but they do. This one is where you plant a tree here in front of this bunker, and all right, it doesn't look too bad. You can kind of see the right half of the green, but in 10, 15, 20 years, I mean, this is kind of what you get. You end up with, 2 hazards, a double hazard. You can't see the green, and who does this really penalize? Most cases, it's probably the high handicap golfer. Other real challenging issues with trees are just tree species. Having visited a lot of your golf courses, I know that the Norway spruce tree seems to be a pretty popular choice in the Northeast. Unfortunately, it's a low branching habit tree, so most golf courses at least limb it up. But if the tree branches go all the way to the ground, this tree, instead of being an obstacle, it's now darn near a hazard. Your golf ball goes in there, you really don't have much of a recovery shot, if any. It could be a lost ball. Coupled with that, you might have other trees near high play areas that have a lot of surface root issues, like the image to the top right. These are really, really challenging trees, and when they're located in a high play area, which for some of your golf courses is the whole property, they're really best to not be located there. So, choosing the right species makes a big difference. Unfortunately, a lot of your golf courses already have these species, and that's a reason, again, to start removing them. Here's an example of overly penal, and although the rough isn't too challenging here, you hit your golf ball in here, everyone's going to be hitting the same shot. The 5 handicap, the 30 handicap, you're all just going to try to punch out to the fairway. There's no real option for a good recovery shot here, or at least maybe once in 20 times you can get a decent recovery shot. But do you really need this amount of trees in this location? And again, you have to constantly ask yourself, who is that? Who's being penalized more so by those trees in that location? This is one that I think sometimes people don't really realize until problems develop, but trees definitely dictate traffic patterns. You're either going one way or the other around a tree. You're not going to go through it. And so as a result, when they're located in between the golf hole and cart paths, they oftentimes dictate where your traffic patterns are going to develop. Same thing really for walking, but it's mostly a cart issue here. So that's another sort of challenge. And then again, this one, I kind of mentioned it earlier with the respective trees and how they impact course aesthetics and long views across the property. If you look at this setting, you can see there's a water feature behind the green. And if you play the course, 20, 30 times a year, not that big of a deal. The water's there. But what about for that first-time player who's never seen the golf course? They kind of get an idea the water's there. Shouldn't this be the view that they get? I mean, this is the feature of that hole. This is probably why the golf course architect put the golf hole right there, to be able to see these views. And what I often talk about on golf course visits is trying to promote long views, panoramic views. Your eyes don't see tunnel vision. Your eyes see the whole room. And that's sort of the views you should have in your golf course, especially if you have neat features like water, big elevated, teeing grounds, things like that. Being able to see long views as opposed to this tunnel vision that a lot of times we develop over time. So promoting these types of views is difficult because, You know, if the trees aren't causing any economic problems, if they're healthy trees, if they look decent, you know, we're going to take a tree down that looks nice to see something better. That's a hard sell, but in many cases it's worked really, really well, and this is definitely becoming the trend at a lot of golf courses across the region. And then finally, sort of tying in the economic sustainability aspect of trees. As I mentioned before, you know, you plant the tree, that's one expense, but then the years and years and years of maintenance afterwards are an added expense. And it's really challenging to figure out how much you're spending on trees in your golf course. You know, you look at this grove of trees and, okay, you're going to spend probably 15-20% longer to mow this area, just having to circle around all those trees, things like that. But what happens when you have a storm? And again, visiting many of your golf courses, it's unfortunate that there's a lot of bad trees out there, trees that have weak limbs, that are very prone to breakage, messy trees like willows, things like that, that, you know, oftentimes as golfers, you don't notice, you know, that there was tree issues that morning that the staff had already picked up, you know, if you're playing in the afternoon. And so there's a lot of expense associated with each of these trees. Same thing, other course outside of this region, this is the practice putting green. This is a big issue for them throughout the entire fall. And fall golf, I think we all know, is some of the best time to play golf in the Northeast, and unfortunately a lot of maintenance staff start to trim down that time of year, and this is the first thing you've got to do every morning before you can cut the green, before you can roll the green. Blow it up every day for 2 months, 3 months in some cases. So this was 7 a.m., blowing the greens off, then they blowed it, then they rolled it. Here's 10:30, you know, basically fairly well littered again. You can still play on it, but I think a lot of us in the room realize that, you know, that's probably not the ideal scenario. And this was a practice green. It's not like the tree had any impact on the playability of the hole there. So other hidden costs here, this is a big ticket item. There's a lot of factors that sort of impact the life expectancy of your cart paths, but I would say probably the number one factor that deteriorates them over time are tree roots. We place a lot of cart paths too close to trees, or maybe bad trees that are too close to cart paths, and you know the tree should go in that case. Tree roots can go through concrete, can go through asphalt really pretty quickly. It's not uncommon for clubs to every few years spend, you know, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 just on cart paths alone, and it's because of the trees. So you know, thinking about where we're investing our money and the value of the tree versus the value of cart path repair over and over and over again. So this article was written by Dave a couple years ago. Had a lot of input from a lot of superintendents in the Northeast region as to their maintenance costs with respect to trees. You'll find this article actually on your USB device that you got. But when you think of the laundry list of items with annual tree projects, whether that's just pruning, just maintenance, then you add in storm damage, debris removal, the mowing impacts of how much longer it takes because trees are there, the equipment impacts because you'll hit roots, there'll be wear and tear on the equipment, the cart path damage. You know, most golf courses are going to spend anywhere from $40,000 to over $175,000 because of the trees on their property. And it really depends on your level of expectations for your turf. It's hard to put a value on that. When we have turf that we want to be pristine all the time throughout the year, and we've got a lot of trees, we're probably going to be spending more money on the, you know, as a result of those trees to keep the turf as good as possible. So really it's just understanding what you're spending on your trees is difficult, but there's a significant cost in most cases. So kind of outlined a lot of the issues with trees. You know, why can't we all just do this? This is an image from Oakmont, probably the poster child for restoring the golf course and eliminating trees that were planted and trying to get back to the original architecture. Pretty simple, let's just do it, right? Cut them down. Anyone know who this is? It's not the greatest image I took from the internet, but I'm a big Seinfeld fan. This is Larry David, and he's a big golfer. And you can just sort of, if anyone knows Larry David or knows of Seinfeld or Curb Your Enthusiasm, you can just picture it. It's like, hey, you can't take that tree down. It's going to make the hole too easy. You make the golf course too easy. You know, this is the common theme that we hear from golfers, committee folks. Superintendents often echo these thoughts, just kind of, all right, well, it might change it. We don't exactly know. But this is really, I think, one of the bigger holdups is that we can't take trees down. Things are going to get too easy. And, you know, only being on staff for the USGA 7 years, you know, Dave has sort of encouraged me to, when you start fielding a lot of questions about the same topic, write about it. And so that's where the genesis of this article came from. how trees impact USGA course rating and slope rating. This was an article I worked on with one of our the highest people up in our course rating department at the USGA. So I'm not an expert on course rating, but working with Scott Hofty, we came up with a pretty good article that this is also included in your USB. So I kind of have to read a little bit of this just to make sure I get the wording right, because it's almost like the rules of golf. The wording's got to be pretty specific or it can get misinterpreted. But the course rating and slope rating are a little bit tricky and I think often misunderstood. The USGA course rating system is really, it's used to predict the difficulty of a golf course for a scratch golfer. It's important, and I highlighted that under normal course conditions and weather conditions. So the course rating is really for the scratch golfer. Okay, a slope rating is the mark that indicates really the measurement of the playing difficulty for players that are not scratch. So whether you're a 5 handicap or you're a 20 handicap, that's the comparison between those two. And that really develops the USGA course rating system, and that's where we build our handicaps from. So we get the handicap system off of a course rating and slope rating. And that kind of drives the USGA course handicap calculator, which if you go on to usga.org, it's pretty simple. I would venture to guess 99.9% of the golf courses you guys might play. You could punch in your handicap index, which hopefully you have established, and type in the slope rating of any course that you're looking to play based on the slope rating from that set of tees. And it'll punch out your handicap for that golf course. So what I think sometimes some golfers confuse is handicap versus handicap index. Your index is sort of what you keep on a regular basis, and it could be 9.3. But if you go play Beth Page, your handicap for that course might actually be like 12, because it's a difficult golf course. So sometimes those two get kind of mixed up. So a little bit of a quick example here. Your handicap index is 9.6, and you play a course with a slope rating of 140. Your course handicap, which means you're going to get 12 strokes, in comparison to a scratch player, is then 12. So what really determines course rating and slope rating, and I won't dive into too much of this, I'll just give you a little bit before I tell you really how trees impact course rating and slope rating. Primarily, and I should say, I don't want to put a percentage on it, but the overwhelming majority of what drives course rating and slope rating is really course yardage, and that's also takes into consideration the effective playing length, firmness, elevation, topography, things like that. Then there are other obstacle values that are sort of looked at on each individual hole, and they receive a 0 to 10 value. And they're looking at those obstacles for a scratch and bogey player. So again, another real important factor to think about. If you're a 30 handicapper, they're not taking those shots into consideration when determining slope rating and course rating. It's really driven by the better player, the scratch player, and the bogey player, and how they're going to navigate through the course under normal conditions. So some of the obstacle values: water hazards, trees, out of bounds, rough difficulty, putting difficulty. These are just a couple of them. All the obstacle values, after the course raters go through, they're all sort of totaled up, multiplied by a weighting factor, and then applied to these formulas for scratch and bogey players. And again, I'm probably losing some folks here. These strokes are then added or subtracted from the yardage rating to produce a bogey rating and course rating. Probably no one in the room has heard of a bogey rating outside of some course raters. It's really not a common term that's brought up, but basically it's very important because the difference between course rating and bogey rating is really what determines the slope rating. So with that, we'll just get into what do trees do with course rating and slope rating. They really impact things from a twofold perspective. The first and foremost is their obstacle value is determined by how far they are from the intended line of play. So how far they are from the intended landing zone, from the center line of that landing zone. Not from the edge of the fairway, from the center line. Same thing for the green. Things like trees behind greens have very little impact because the scratch player and the bogey player don't really hit the ball long. They also don't hit the ball consistently 40, 50 yards to the right or the left. So it's really the main landing areas and relatively close to the center line. The other part of the obstacle rating that they impact is really the recovery potential. And that's rated either minor, moderate, significant, or extreme. If you've got a really dense wooded area, that's going to get a higher obstacle value. Other adjustments are for shoots or like obstruction trees, trees that obstruct the landing zones of greens, those that define a dog leg, those that have limbs that extend all the way to the ground. These are all going to get slightly higher obstacle values. So other things, again, trees located sort of 30 or more yards from the center line of the hole probably have very, very little impact on the obstacle value. Same thing, a few trees in the landing zone can really produce the same obstacle value as a fairway lined with 50, 60 trees, because bogey and scratch golfers are not the ones topping it off the tee. They're not snap hooking it 100 yards left right off of a par 4 tee or something like that. And then also, the longer the hole, the higher obstacle value these trees will have, because your shot dispersion is a little bit wider. You've got a little more room for error there. So, looking at it from a plate, really all three, we'll look at it from a architectural standpoint. Again, I'm not an architect, but this is, I think, a fairly easy one. And then looking at a course rating and an agronomic perspective, these are the trees that really define the dog leg. If you go back on this teeing ground, you can't really see these trees that I circled are the ones that stick out the most from the landings or from the teeing ground. They're the ones adjacent sort of to the primary landing zone. These are the most important trees. These trees really don't do much, outside of provide sort of a consistent look from the Google map. They don't do much. What you can't see, just like that pond picture, there's a cart path in there. This golf course has 95% rounds with carts. All the carts are exiting right here. There's a lot of cart path in there. There's no turf underneath these trees. And when you look at these trees having virtually no impact on course rating or slope rating, and really I would say only hurting the high handicap players who might hit it short right, what's their value? And then agronomically, again, they're weakening the turf because they're shade and they're limiting carts entry-exit points. So taking these trees out really isn't going to have any impact whatsoever. So wanted to provide some information with respect to course rating and slope rating. For an example of a course with and without trees. And so I'll start again. A lot of this information was really provided to me from Scott Hovde with our course rating department. But this is an actual golf course. It has a minimal amount of trees on it. Okay, so we're just going to use this golf course as an example and simulate adding trees to the golf course. So the course rating was 73.8, slope rating 128. I chose two just random handicaps, the index of 9.6 and 15.3. Okay, so for this golf course with minimal trees on it, you get an index of 9.6, you get 11 strokes. If your index was 15.3, you'd get 17. Okay? Then let's say we add trees to the entire golf course. Okay? So the first one, we're going to add a moderate amount of trees to all 18 holes and look at what changes. So course rating goes up to 74.4, slope rating 139. For the 9.6 player, he gets one more stroke when all the trees, a moderate amount of trees, are added to every single hole. A player that has an index of 15.3, their handicap goes up to 19, so they get 2 strokes now because there's more trees and they're not quite as good of a player. Then if we add a high amount of trees to all 18 holes of the golf course, course rating goes up to 75, slope rating 147. The player that's 9.6 didn't get any more strokes. Their handicap stayed at 12. The player with a 15.3, their handicap went up to 20. So the point really is that, adding in all these trees to all 18 holes really has a very, very small impact on how many strokes you're going to get for most players. This is some quotes directly from Scott on courses with tree-lined fairways, and I kind of set him up on this, asking the question. It's very likely that 50% of the trees that run along the sides of holes could be removed on the entire course and have very little impact on course rating and slope rating. Same thing, remember this, is that course rating and slope rating are derived from the expected score for scratch and bogey golfers. They're not finding tree trouble half the time they hit the tee shot. Most cases, bogey golfers can have tree troubles 2 or 3 times over the course of 18 holes, and that's probably going to only impact 1 or 2 strokes of their whole round, because if they're a bogey player, they're probably going to be able to navigate here or there through some trees and get up and down and get bogey or what have you. So when you average the impact of trees over 10 rounds, it's really clear that there's a small impact on course rating. Slope rating and a player's handicap index are really not going to be affected if trees are removed or added from a few holes. I showed you the example when trees were added to the entire golf course, and we barely saw any change, let alone when you take out, 10, 15 trees across the whole golf course, taking out certain trees behind greens that are causing shade. So I think, you're kind of seeing these trees are not having much of an impact at all on course rating and slope rating. Now that said, there are key architectural trees that are out there, and these are the sensitive ones that we need to be mindful of, where the hole could get easier. That's subjective though, so that's always tricky. That's where course rating and slope rating, it's more objective. And so when there are, defining trees that are causing agronomic issues, these are really the tough ones that you have to work with your superintendent, your golf course architect, your agronomist to sort of put all the best minds together and figure out what's the best course of action. And hopefully the agronomic issues take precedence and you get the tree out and you make adjustments to your golf hole from there if you need to. So here's an example. This is an old picture. This was Medina before the Ryder Cup. So I forget what hole this is. You can see there's a tree fronting the left, 12 or 13. There's a tree sort of front left of this green. Definitely an impact from an obstacle value on this hole. So if you take this tree down, this is where you hear the argument. You can't do that. The hole's going to get easier. Well, it's hard to know if it's really going to get easier. It's going to be different. The obstacle value will probably go down for this particular hole because the tree's not there. But course rating and slope rating for one tree, it's really not going to go anywhere. Not anywhere significant anyways. So we get this question sometimes too. Well, what about with, do you have any historical data on course rating and slope rating for courses that have done some of these major tree renovations and don't really have a lot of good information that is relevant outside of this slide here. This is probably the best case scenario. Again, Oakmont is really the poster child for having a golf course with a lot of trees and then taking a lot of them out. And so what's been interesting was, we've had a number of U.S. Opens at Oakmont over the past 5 decades or so, sort of with and without trees. And if you look at the winning score between 73, 83, 94, and 2007, it actually went up without the trees. They took most of the trees down between 94 and 2007. And so there was obviously adjustments in course setup for length and things like that, but the trees did not make this golf course for the better player. They don't hit it in the trees. I mean, that's where course rating, slope rating are all derived from. So when you think about if the trees are really impacting your golfers, they're probably impacting more of the high handicap players more than anything. So a couple of agronomic benefits of fewer trees. This is a direct example at Oakmont. A lot of other courses that have taken down a significant amount of trees. It's magic. The rough gets a heck of a lot better without tree competition, with more sunlight. So thin, sparse rough, becomes dense, healthy, uniform standard rough, with very little changes in the agronomic programs, just with more sunlight, things improve. Also, if you've got greens that are weak because there's too much shade, there's too little air movement, things like that, you take care of those tree issues, and a lot of times they become a lot healthier, and maybe you could push them harder. Just as Dave said earlier, that doesn't mean that's the right thing to do to speed the greens up or to make them, a lot firmer. But both rough difficulty and putting green difficulty impact course rating and slope rating. So if you're concerned about maybe the slight decrease in the obstacle value from trees being missing, but then the rough gets a little tougher and maybe the putting difficulty gets a little tougher, they can even out. So, and then finally, some real significant challenges in the grand scheme of things. This, I don't know how you deal with this one, but this is, some folks, this is a reality.